Welcome to the second multi-church worship combining Orange and LA County Unitarian Universalist churches. I am the Reverend Rika Koffel, serving the Unitarian Universalist Church of Anaheim, and I'm delighted to welcome you along with the Reverends Ken, Karen, Raina, Sean, Jason, Steve, and Lee Marie. We have a house full of Reverends. Let us take a moment to respectfully recognize that all of our church properties rest on Ahachiman and Tongva land. Today, we have a wonderful worship service for you, including music by our many gifted music leaders and our directors of religious education. It just works out so wonderfully that on this Sunday, when we remember the merger of Unitarians and Universalists 60 years ago, and also the gifts of our different faith traditions, we too come together for Sunday, merging our congregations for the celebration of worship and sharing our plentiful gifts. This worked out perfectly. And that is not a sentence I've been saying often this past year, but today it really did. By way of welcome, I would like to invite you all to open the chat box at this time to say good morning, and you might say which church you normally attend. I also want to extend a special welcome to visitors. You have come to a really fun service where 6 different congregations from around the Southern California region have come together to worship. If you're seeking a spiritual home, we hope that you reach out to the congregation nearest you and join them next week for their regular service. But we're also really happy to have you here today. As Unitarian Universalists, we are bound together, not by a creed or a common set of rules and beliefs, but by a covenant, a promise that whatever our beliefs, we accept one another and encourage each other in our spiritual growth. We affirm that all life has inherent value and that all existence is interconnected. We strive for justice and compassion in our deeds and relationships, being committed to creating a welcoming community without regards to the traits that sometimes divide people. It is this covenant, this promise, renewed every time we gather together, that keeps our tradition alive. After this service, we will be placing everyone who remains into Zoom breakout rooms for 20 minutes of social time. Everyone is welcome to join, and it's a great way to get to know people of all these amazing, wonderful Unitarian Universalist churches in the area. Our worship begins with the lighting of our chalice, the symbol of the Unitarian Universalist tradition. Love is the spirit of these congregations, and service is their law. To dwell together in peace, to seek truth and love, and to help one another. This we affirm together. Please join me now in singing our welcoming hymn, Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Spirit of life, stirrings of compassion blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
As we gather in worship, I want to recognize we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. It seems like our capacity has maxed out at 100 and several people are still trying to join us in worship. So hopefully we can get that straightened out. So whether this is your first time at a Unitarian Universalist worship service, or you've been doing this for 50 years, you are welcome here. All of us here are inheritors of this living tradition. For hundreds, probably thousands of years, this faith community that we call home was built stone by stone by prophets and mystics, by justice makers and peace builders. Each of them shared a part of themselves to build this Unitarian Universalist tradition. This is a living tradition. It grows with new insight and discoveries. This living tradition grows and changes with every single person that comes through our doors or into our virtual community. You, friends, are what make this a living tradition. Here, now, today, together, we are Unitarian Universalism. Let us join together in worship.
Our story today is Stone Soup by John J. Muth. 3 monks, Hawk, Lock, and Sue, traveled along a mountain road. They talked about cat whiskers, the color of the sun, and giving. "What makes one happy, Sue?" asked Hawk, the youngest monk. Old Sue, who was the wisest, said, "Let's find out."
The sound of a bell brought their gaze to the rooftops of a village below. They could not see from so high above that the village had been through many hard times. Famine, floods, and war had made the villagers weary and untrusting of strangers. They had even become suspicious of their own neighbors.
The villagers were tried, but only for themselves. There was a farmer, a teamster, a tea merchant, a scholar, a seamstress, a doctor, a carpenter, and many others. But they had little to do with one another.
When the monks reached the foot of the mountain, the villagers disappeared into their houses. No one came to the gates to greet them. And when the people saw them enter the village, they closed their windows tight.
The monks knocked on the door of the first house. There was no answer. Then the house went dark. They knocked on a second door, and the same thing happened. It happened again and again, from one house to the next. "These people do not know happiness," they all agreed. "But today," said Sue, his face bright as the moon, "we will show them how to make stone soup."
They gathered twigs and branches and made a fire. They placed a small tin pot on top and filled it with water from the village well.
A brave little girl who had been watching came to them. "What are you doing?" she asked. "We are gathering twigs," said Locke. "We are making a fire," said Hawk. We are making a stone soup and we need 3 round, smooth stones, said Sue.
The little girl helped the monks look around the courtyard until they found just the right ones. Then they put them in the water to cook.
These stones will make excellent soup, said Siu. But this very small pot won't make much, I'm afraid. My mother has a bigger pot, said the girl.
The little girl ran home. As she started to take a pot, her mother asked what she was doing. "The 3 strangers are making soup from stones," she said. "They need our biggest pot." Said the girl's mother. "Stones are easy to come by. I'd like to learn how to do that." The monks poked the coals. As smoke drifted up, neighbors peered out from their windows. The fire and the large pot in the middle of the village was a true curiosity. One by one, the people of the village came out to see just what this stone soup was. Of course, old-style stone soup should be well seasoned with salt and pepper, said Hawk. "That is true," said Locke, as he stirred the giant pot filled with water and stones. "But we have none." "I have some salt and pepper," said the scholar, his eyes big with curiosity. He disappeared and came back with salt and pepper, and even a few other spices. Sue took a taste. "The last time we had soup stones of this size and color, carrots made the broth very sweet." "Carrots?" said a woman from the back. "I may have a few carrots, but just a few." And off she ran. She returned with as many carrots as she could carry and dropped them into the pot.
Do you think it would be better with onions? Asked Hawk. Oh yes, maybe an onion would taste good, said a farmer, and he hurried off. He returned in a moment with 5 big onions, and he dropped them into the bubbling soup. Now that's a fine soup, he said. The villagers all nodded their heads, as the smell was very agreeable.
"But if only we had some mushrooms," said Sue, rubbing his chin. Several villagers licked their lips. A few dashed away and returned with fresh mushrooms, noodles, pea pods, and cabbage. Bye.
Something magical began to happen among the villagers. As each person opened their heart to give, the next person gave even more. And as this happened, the soup grew richer and more delicious.
"I imagine the emperor would suggest we add dumplings," said one villager. "And bean curd," said another. "What about cloudier and mung bean and yams?" cried some others. "And arrowroot and winter melon and baby corn," cried other villagers. "Garlic, ginger root, soy sauce, lilybuds in it. I have some. People cried out, and off they ran, returning with all they could carry. The monks stirred, and the pot bubbled. How good it smelled! How good it would taste! How giving the villagers had become. At last, the soup was ready. The villagers gathered together. They brought rice and steamed buns. They brought lychee nuts and sweet cakes. They brought tea to drink, and they lit lanterns.
Everyone sat down to eat. they had not been together for as long as anybody could remember. After the banquet, they told stories and sang songs and celebrated long into the night.
Then they unlocked their doors and took the monks into their homes and gave them very comfortable places to sleep. In the gentle spring morning, everyone gathered together near the windows to say farewell. Thank you for having us as your guests, said the monks. You have been most generous. Thank you, said the villagers. With the gifts you have given, we will always have plenty. You have shown us that sharing makes us all richer. And to think, said the monks, to be happy is as simple as making stone soup. The end.
Seven principles, 7 principles. Let's build a better world around 7 principles. 1. Every person is important. 1. Every person is important. 2. Be kind in all you do. 2. Be kind in all you do. 3. We're free to learn together. 3. We're free to learn together. 4. We search for what is true. 4. We search for what is true. 7 principles, 7 principles. Let's build a better world around 7 principles. 5. 1 vote for every person. 5. 1 vote for every person. 6. Build a fair and peaceful world. 6. Build a fair and peaceful world. 7. We take care of our earth. 7. We take care of our earth. These 7 principles we promote and affirm. These 7 principles we promote and affirm. 7 principles, 7 principles. Let's build a better world around 7 principles. 1. Every person is important. 2. Be kind in all you do. 3. We're free to learn together. 4. We search for what is true. 5. 1 vote for every person. 6. Build a fair and peaceful world. 7. We take care of our earth. These 7 principles we promote and affirm. 7 principles, 7 principles. Let's build a better world around 7 principles.
Our meditation this morning begins with a reading by Victoria Safford, who is a UU minister. Please join me in meditation as I share this reading with you and then invite you into responding with your heart to 3 requests. What if there were a universe, a cosmos, which began in shining blackness out of nothing, out of fire, out of a single silent breath, and into it came billions and billions of stars, stars beyond imagining, and near one of them, a world, a blue-green world, so beautiful that learned clergymen could not even speak about it cogently. and brilliant scientists with their physics, their mathematics, their empirical, impressionistic musing in trying to describe it would begin to sound like poets. What if there were a universe in which a world was born out of a smallish star, and into that world, at some point, flew red-winged blackbirds, and into it swam sperm whales, and into it bloomed crocuses, and into it blew wind to lift the tiniest hairs on naked arms in spring. And into it at some point grew onions out of soil. And in went Mount Everest. And also the coyote we've spotted in the woods about a mile from here, just after sunrise on these mornings when the moon is full. The very scent of him makes his brother, our dog, insane with fear and joy and an ancient inbred memory. Into that world came the animals and elements and plants and imagination, the mind and the mind's eye. If such a universe existed and you noticed it, what would you do? What song would come out of your mouth? What prayer? What praises? What sacred offering? What whirling dance? What religion? And what reverential gesture would you make to greet that world every single day that you were in it? So now I'd like to invite you to take a moment to be thankful for the most beautiful natural thing that is in your world. See it in your heart. Now think of the animals that have graced your life and be thankful for them. Think of them with gladness in your heart. And finally, take time to let your heart be glad for all those people who have taught you, who have walked through life with you, who have helped you to be grateful for your experiences of the blue-green world you inhabit. Hold them in your heart with love. Amen.
Hello, good morning. The sunny morning I first walked in, maybe a little hesitantly, to a Unitarian Universalist church in 1989, I knew I was home. At that time, I was a partner, a mother of small children, a busy student, but I knew immediately this was the place I was supposed to be. Today, for our service celebrating the merger of our you and you traditions, I'm delighted to offer up the gifts of our Unitarian heritage through the lens of my childhood, my own first visits, and through my current ministry. Unitarianism has been and continues to be a guiding force in my life. In thinking about the gifts of Unitarianism and traveling back and remembering what gifts I first received, I need to start with the book Little Women, written by Unitarian author Louisa May Alcott. I discovered this book on the shelves of my home. Some of you likely grew up with the stories of the four sisters who lived an idealized Unitarian life in Concord, Massachusetts during the Civil War. When I first arrived as a UU newbie and a mother, I was delighted to find a full religious education program for my children, echoing those Unitarian values I had read about as a child in Little Women. No wonder I felt like I was home. Unitarianism offers us the gift of living prophets, the voices and actions of those like the Alcott family who would change damaged and damaging systems of education, slavery, women's rights, racial injustices, incarceration, and inspiring partnership with our more vulnerable folks. As a faith rooted in the Judeo-Christian tradition, I saw a balance of reverence for our UU religious past, but with an ongoing questioning of the status quo. I was thrilled to be included in social justice projects and that really truly embodied the call of Jesus and all the world's great religions to love our neighbors as ourselves. Shout out to Paul and Clover here. My family and I joined Orange Coast UU in the early days of the AIDS epidemic, and my entire family helped with creating meals for homebound AIDS patients. I am still very grateful for the opportunities to assist others and participate in a loving community that actively walks its talk to share its values. As a learning tradition, Unitarian theology and history allows us to share a long and fascinating journey, one that continues to challenge us today in the co-creation of an ongoing living tradition. We trace our Unitarian beliefs from the 4th century, the author Arius, and then on the physician Michael Servetus, who published his work on the errors of the Trinity at the age of 20. I'm not sure what I was doing at 20, but I don't think I was writing these long theological treatises in 1531, and Servetus died for those beliefs. Today, our Unitarian cousins continue to gather in locations such as Kazi Hills, India, and Transylvania. During my ministerial studies, I was really privileged to meet Unitarians from other areas of the world. By example, Unitarianism encourages us to continue our own religious and theological exploration. Many of our Unitarian ancestors were open to theological ideas from scriptures of other countries and cultures. Our Unitarian transcendentalist ancestors, such as Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, Ralph Waldo Emerson, pioneered in the reading and publishing of works from Hinduism and Buddhism in the 1800s. As a mystic who loves science, I found an immediate home in a place where both mystics and scientists are honored. My UU humanist atheist friends, shout out to all of you, who now include my own children, have challenged me from my first days as a UU to sharpen and clarify my own theological beliefs. Humanist theologians Anthony Pinn, Sharon Welch, and Michael Hogan challenge us in modern times. And for us science fiction fans, who wouldn't love a tradition that was home to Rod Serling, the creator of the sci-fi television series, The Twilight Zone, and Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. Rod Serling and his wife, Carol, joined the Unitarian Church in the 1940s. Our congregations are the place where I can talk about the most recent trends in brain research as they relate to meditation and mystical experiences. I find this a happy merging of mysticism and science. Science fact, science fiction, catching up to ancient practices. As I prepared for today, I realized my experiences as a child and when I was a new Unitarian Universalist were directly reflected in our 6 sources. I'm writing thinking this is sounding very familiar. Our 6 sources provide a long and powerful legacy from our Unitarian and our Universalist ancestors and, again, other sources. And these include the direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, deeds and prophecies, words and deeds of prophetic people, wisdom from the world's traditions and religions, Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves, and humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science. I had to shorten them a little, and I'm so used to the longer readings that my brain is tripping over the shortened version. Our sixth source, and again, speaking as a UU mystic and a pagan, continues to speak deeply to me. Spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. And others may interpret that in very different ways. But again, it's one that speaks very deeply to me. I ask us to hold all of these sources closely together in our modern living tradition, to share them deeply and powerfully. No one of the six sources needs to exclude any other. I encourage us all to read them over, perhaps do a little more research. I love research into both our Universalist as well as our Unitarian heritage. There's so much there. We have such a rich history. Thank you for sharing our Unitarian journey with me this morning. Amen and blessed be. You're invited now to joyfully join Carol in singing our hymn number 1052, The Oneness of Everything.
Far beyond the grasp of hands, or light to meet the eye, past the reaches of the mind, there find the key to nature's harmony in an architecture so entwined.
So about 12 years ago, I think it was, I worked as a chaplain in a county jail. And on Wednesday evenings, I would run a service for the Christian inmates. Now, mostly it was singing a few hymns, maybe a reading from the Bible, and then my partner and I would ask them to respond to how that reading spoke to them in their lives, right? But honestly, this was mostly a time for the inmates to talk about their lives and their challenges, and all manner of topics would come up. One night, there was a young man at the service, and I remember he asked with just great anxiety, he said, I have a girlfriend who's Jewish and I really love her, but I'm worried, is she gonna go to hell? Now, before I could answer, another older man spoke up. I remember he would come with his Bible and he said, oh, yes, she will. She has to embrace Jesus in her heart. I remember seeing the devastation on that young man's face as he looked at him, and instead I interrupted and I said, you know what? I'm a universalist. I believe God's love is so grand, so vast, that all are saved. I remember this sort of stunned silence in the room. But I also remember the look of relief on that young man's face. And I remember the older man looked sort of bewildered because I had given him something to think about. Because you know what? You really can't argue with God being loving. Even the fundamentalists talk about God's love. And that's what universalism is all about at its roots, love. I'm not talking about romantic love or even parental love. I'm talking about a love that's that all-pervasive feeling of oneness, that feeling that recognizes me and you and me, that feeling that knows in the depths of my belly that each person has inherent dignity and worth. It's knowing that when I harm you, I harm myself. That when one of us is hurt, all of us is hurt. That's what I mean by love. And I call it a holy love. Now, Unitarian Universalism has gone through an evolution to get to this place. If you were to look up universalism, even today, you would find a definition that says something like, it's a Christian belief that Christ's atonement was for everyone's sins, not just a select few or for believers. And that theology is still around, and it's where we started. It's what I said to that young man. As a denomination, however, the Universalists came together actually in the 18th century. I think it was 1785, if I remember correctly. But the Universalist theology goes all the way back to, well, this guy named Origen. Actually, in the 3rd century, he was a Christian philosopher. And not all Universalists agree on every point. Some believe that, well, okay, yes, God eventually saves everyone, but some bad people have to go to hell for a little while, right? But that true blue, everyone is saved, there is no hell, Universalists, they won out by about the mid-19th century. And their argument was that God's love, you know what, so huge, so beyond our understanding that of course everyone was saved. And they moved that image of God beyond that limited understanding of an angry, jealous, to be feared God that was so pervasive among the Puritans and a God that was made more in our image, right? They moved it to a God that transcended the petty nature of our humanity and instead represented what was best in our nature, love. You know, it's said that we're made in God's image, right? But the reality is that we make God into our image. And if that image is one of a petty sinner, then it isn't going to be a good one, right? The Calvinistic preachers of the 18th and 19th century, they preached, you know what, you're a depraved sinner, nothing you can do about it, so go home and pray you're one of the saved. But one of the greatest gifts the Universalists gave us was imagining a new image of God, one that appealed to our better natures, that called us to be just as holy as God, to be loving. And you know what? This new image, when it came out, hugely popular. It was truly good news. These Universalist preachers went out into the highways and the byways to hold tent revivals that told people, you are so loved, nothing you can do about it, so go out and act like it. good news indeed. And by the 20th century, the Universalists began to expand their understanding of God's love. As we began to explore the world's religions, the good news of universalism became less about salvation from hell and more about inclusiveness, particularly finding the holy in all religions. It's what we call pluralism, which is what Unitarian Universalists are today. Universalism began to see the oneness in the universality of our shared humanity. Okay, if you don't believe in God and you definitely don't believe in hell, what gifts remain from the Universalists today for us modern Unitarian Universalists? To me, Universalism still gives us a new way of understanding the holy. Many modern Unitarian Universalists I have met are more about rejecting the image of either an angry, petty God or a supernatural one that sort of grants wishes, right? Universalism instead invites us to consider that the holy, or God, may not be a being, a God, but maybe is a way of being. God not as a noun, but as a verb, to love. That when we act from a place of holy love, we are bringing a holy presence into the world. That we are, each of us, prophets that get to bring the good news by bringing love, compassion, and justice to the world. So my dears, go out into the highways and the byways and spread the good news of universalism. That you are loved, that you are love itself. It is part of who you are, nothing you can do about it, so go out and act like it.
Go out, go out, go out into the highways and byways. Go out, go out, go out, and give the people something of your new vision. Oh, go out. Oh, go out and give the people something of your new vision. You may possess a small light only, but uncover it and let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Use it to bring more understanding to the hearts and minds of men. Go out into the highways and byways. Go out into the highways and byways. Go out into the highways and byways. Go out, give them not hell, but give them hope, and give them courage. Give them hope and courage, not hell. Do not push them deeper into their despair. Give them not hell, not hell, but give them courage and hope. And preach the kindness and the everlasting love of God. Go out, go out, go out, go out, go out, go out, go out into the highways and byways. Go out, go out, go out, go out, go out. Go out into the highways. Go out into the byways.
You know, I was thinking, some things just really go well together. Um, Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland, Diana Ross and the Supremes, Woodward and Bernstein, peanut butter and jelly, peanut butter and chocolate for that matter. I guess I'm saying peanut butter goes well with a lot of things, which actually led to the idea I was just reading the other day. During the Great Depression, there was an idea to make baked onions stuffed with peanut butter. Now, needless to say, peanut butter and onions did not really catch on. So what can we say here at the 60th anniversary of the merger of Unitarianism and Universalism? Are we the near perfection of a peanut butter cup, or are we a Depression era plate of peanut butter and onions? You know, instead of calling ourselves Unitarian Universalist, sometimes I wished we called ourselves something like the Free Church, free to think, free to believe or not believe, free to be ourselves, free to come together in covenant. The Free Church. Maybe if we called ourselves that, journalists would have gotten our name right. But that's not what we called ourselves, because we didn't want to lose the thread of either one of these great traditions you've heard about this morning. And rightly so, it turns out. After all, long-term relationships are not easy. They always require some kind of work, effort. And from almost the start of the merger, the Bostonian intellectualism of Unitarianism has threatened to eclipse that open-hearted spirituality of Universalism. In recent years, there's been a conscious effort to make room for both, because it is the evolution of these merged gifts that offers a faith for our world today. You know, 60 years ago, upon the occasion of the merger, Reverend Donald Harrington said, "It is our tremendous potential, caused in turn by this new world's need for a religion which is dynamic instead of static, united instead of divisive, universalistic instead of particularistic, history making rather than history bound. I say it is our tremendous potential and the feeling of its surge and excitement in us and in our churches that made this Unitarian Universalist merger necessary and indeed inevitable." That was 1961, midst of the civil rights movement, when the world needed a faith movement that was uniting, theologically diverse, and yes, socially engaged. Still sounds, well, almost uncomfortably relevant. Look, I know how hard this past year has been for all of us. There's been loss, confusion, isolation, depression, grief. And we have witnessed some terrible things. The words of our former president, the actions of conspiracy theorists, the strident voices of white nationalistic pundits. Responding from the Unitarian side of our tradition is fairly easy. We can call out these behaviors from a place of reasoned debate. But listen deeply to this ugliness, and you'll hear a primal cry for the healing and loving accountability we inherit from Universalism, which is also built into our faith movement. And that is the word for it, movement. Unitarian Universalism is actually going someplace, even when it's hard, like being accountable for ableism and white supremacy right here in our own systems. But even when it feels as awkward as peanut butter and onions, I am proud to be part of a faith tradition doesn't take the easy way out. This week I was working on a paper for my doctoral program. Subject: Unitarian Universalism's Understanding and Response to Trauma. So I found myself envying some of my classmates who can easily look in a book to see what their religion says about this subject. Our principles and sources are not really a roadmap. How we use these tools, and that's what they are, tools to respond to suffering, to injustice, well, that's up to us. And we're still figuring it out. As seen when our Fullerton congregation recently voted to add to the 7 principles, the 8th principle dedicated to racial justice. So this week, after I was done complaining, and I did that for a while, but complaining because this paper was so hard to write, I realized what a gift it is to be part of a living tradition where the answers are still unfolding. That what we have inherited from Unitarianism is to be thoughtful and informed, and from Universalism is to be inclusive and loving. Both together help us to be balanced, whole human beings. And in a world where the Israel-Palestine conflict exists, where COVID devastates the most vulnerable in India, in a world with so much brokenness, people want to know how to be whole. Sometimes in the lobby after a play I've just performed in, or at a dinner party where a swear word has slipped out, don't tell my mom, someone will say, "Wait, you're a minister?" I'm never quite sure if I should be flattered or insulted. But then they ask, what is this thing called Unitarian Universalism? And when they ask, they're really asking how they can feel more whole. So on the 60th anniversary, let's commit to telling them about ourselves as though we were huddled around a campfire. We can no longer keep this 60-year secret, and we can tell them we're this big starry sky full of possibility under which freely flow multiple streams of belief, and that we think the real test of faith is in choosing to come together in a world where human intervention works to keep us apart. And as we tell this story around this campfire, you can picture them beginning to lean in, and they do. I've seen it. And there is a whisper that rises among these listeners. This religious option exists? I never knew. So rather than say we are 60 years old today, let's say we are 60 years young. And we still have a faith that is youthfully revolutionary if we could just get out of our own way and share it. Because we have yet to fully discover what we can be. May this be our moment of reckoning where we commit to continuing that discovery with joy, with celebration, and with uniting waters of Unitarians' courageous, steady stream and Universalism's welcoming river depths. We find ourselves in that communal sea where our free church, an ark of hope and possibility, floats and moves and learns to shift nimbly with each new turn of the tide. Number 145, as tranquil streams, let us sing.
as tranquil streams that meet and merge and flow as one to seek the sea. Our kindred hearts and minds unite to build a church that shall be free. Free from the bonds that bind the mind to an narrow thought and lifeless greed. Free from a social code that fails to serve the cause of human need. A freedom that reveres the past, but trusts the dawning future, and bids the soul in search of truth adventure boldly and explore. Prophetic church, the future waits your liberating ministry. Go forward in the power of love, proclaim the truth that makes us free.
My name is Reverend Steve Wilson. I'm here at Pacific Unitarian Church. We've got probably 40 folks here live. We've just come back a couple weeks. And here's I generally tell a lie of a story to set up the offering. And Janet James was walking down the street, our leader at De Benneville, and she was concerned, of course, about De Benneville's well-being. They've had a pandemic, they've had fires, they're struggling financially. Our plate today will go directly to De Benneville, but she was concerned and she saw a local church. So she strolled in, a little bit out of character for her, and she was thinking about the hundreds of thousands of dollars it'll take to get De Benneville right. And she reluctantly, but kneeled down in this church to sort of pray for De Benneville's well-being. She sat down, interestingly enough, right next to a man who was doing the very same thing, and she heard him pray that he needed $10 to buy some food. Well, Janet's a very kind person, and she knows that prayer activates the best in us at its best, and she pulled out of her wallet a $10 bill and handed it to him. And he gleefully left the church feeling like he had his prayer answered. Janet kneeled down, bowed her hands and said, "Dear Mother and Father God, now that I have your undivided attention, please help the camp." I turn it over to Dave Botts and a video we're going to see of De Benneville.
We recognize and honor the Marayam or Serrano indigenous people who were the original stewards of the land Camp de Benneville Pines sits on. It has been an unprecedented year, with Camp de Benneville Pines closed for over a year because of the pandemic. Also, we had to find new insurance in July last year since our longtime carrier, Church Mutual, would not renew. In September, the El Dorado fire came right up to the Camp de Benneville Pines boundaries, and the fire department was able to save all the cabins. In October, I was calmed by the serene beauty of the untouched campus and interspersed green in the tall trees standing on the slopes above. Walking the slopes above Camp de Benneville Pines, including the water system, there was reason to be hopeful that the sounds of the forest, birds, and greenery would return. It was a joy again to hike the water system in a foot of snow in mid-November, observing a squirrel dart into the snow that and observing footprints of large four-legged critters ranging widely. In late March, all the snow had melted. The amount of precipitation, mostly in the form of snow, was rather low this year. Thus, no water runoff erosion, but new plant growth was sparse. It was nice to be in a place, however, where there was no traffic and it was quiet. Camp de Benneville Pines relies more and more on recurring, mostly monthly, unrestricted donations to pay for insurance and security while we have no income. When we have income again, these donations will be required to keep guest fees affordable and to pay for a living wage for staff. Hopefully, this fall we can open if the pandemic is put under control. Camp de Benneville Pines, a Unitarian Universalist sponsored campus, is here to nourish your lives. With your contributions, plans to be here as a forest retreat to nurture your spiritual health far into the future. Thank you for your support.
There is one question I'd really love to ask. Is there a place for the hopeless sinner who has hurt all mankind just to save his own? Believe this. One love. What about the one heart? What about the people? Get together and we'll feel alright. As it was in the beginning, so shall it be in the end. Alright. The Lord and we'll feel alright. Let's get together and we'll feel alright. One more thing. Let's get together to fight this holy Armageddon. So when the man comes, there will be no more doom. Have pity on those whose chances grows thinner. There ain't no hiding place from the Father of creation, saying, one love. What about the one heart? One heart. What about the let's get together and we'll feel alright. I'm pleading to mankind. One love. Hear the children cry. One heart. Give thanks and praise to the Lord and we will feel alright. Let's get together and we'll feel alright. Give thanks and praise to the Lord and we will feel alright. Let's get together and we'll feel alright.
Please join me now in a spirit of prayer or reflection, each according to our own practices. One love, spirit of life, spirit of one love, holding us now together. Let us give thanks for our Unitarian ancestors, whose central tenet was that Jesus was a human being, and that his life was an example of the possibilities inherent in all human beings. Thus, Unitarianism developed to mean oneness of God, one love. Let us give thanks for our Universalist ancestors, whose belief that no person could be condemned to eternal punishment. Thus, universalism at its core means a oneness of God, one love. Spirit of life, we have, as a faith tradition, fallen sometimes, fallen down on our promises and aspirations, as we have mirrored the context of the cultures in which we have lived and which we have gathered. At times, we were even supportive or complicit in some injustices. Yes, we must admit that in our past, at times, we have been exclusive of so many people in our human family: women, persons of color, indigenous people, immigrants, the disabled, those of other faith traditions, and spiritual practices, people of varying sexual orientations and gender identities, and importantly, those who have lived on the margins of what we had considered social and economic norms. Spirit of one love, today more than ever, after more than a year of a global pandemic, becoming more awakened to the evils of racial injustice, and faced with the consequences of our ways of life affecting global climate change, we realize poignantly more than ever that we are part of the interdependent web of all existence. Our living tradition of Unitarian Universalism has evolved over these past centuries, and it continues. As for us, revelation is never sealed. So we are the very embodiment of the spirit of life, of this one love together. May we keep on moving forward in this wonderful one love, inspired by our ancestors and we who have followed them. May we, the inheritors, give thanks and praise for the gifts we have been given to be followers and leaders of one love. May it be so. Go out. Amen. And blessed be.
Let us join together as we extinguish the flame of our chalice and say together, we extinguish our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Thank you to the people who made it into the Zoom meeting. Thank you to all of those who stuck it out with the Facebook live stream. Thank you for being there. I don't actually see you, but I see you in my heart. And thank you to those who just gathered the whole church in your general church Zoom room and live streamed it there. Shout out to the ingenuity of my Anaheimers. Thank you all for being there in whatever form you were. Before we go this morning, I want to draw your attention to a large Unitarian Universalist gathering. General Assembly is coming up, our annual national gathering, which will be online June 23rd to June 27th. And then also to the many wonderful events put on by different churches in the area that are open to all. For example, Tapestry has a music drive-in that is gonna be live, but outside, but not virtual. Orange Coast has all kinds of nice events like their Rainbow Movie Night. There's so much coming up, and it would be lovely to see you there. Let's get this let's keep this intra-congregational love fest going. If you are a guest or a visitor, we hope that you enjoyed the special service. Feel free to write your name in the chat or comment on the Facebook live stream, and let us know where you're from so that we can connect you to the church nearest to you. After the benediction, there will also be a short period where everyone can wave and say hello. And those of you who remain and wish to will be put into Zoom breakout groups for 20 minutes. And if you're watching on Facebook Live, but you were really looking forward to being in a breakout room, usually not everybody stays in the meeting for that. So just try to log in again with a Zoom link, and hopefully then there will be enough space for you to be put into a breakout room and have a little bit of conversation. Thank you everyone for being here.
We have heard the stories and prayed the prayers and sung the songs. Now comes the important part of our shared faith. Now is the time to go out there and live it. So until we meet again, go in peace and let the light within you be a blessing to the world.
The service is over. Let our service continue. Please unmute yourself, say hi to each other, and then wait to be put into a breakout room if you choose to do so.